Коллеги, пожалуйста, садитесь.
Take seats, colleagues, please. Take seats, please. Make haste. Hurry. So we continue our deliberations. So please pay attention to me. So we continue our work. Poland always brings a lot of confusion to the Russian way of life. Yes, it's for a long time. We have observed that. Dear Armenians, please. So who are you? They're answering. We are Armenians. What are you? We are Armenians. Okay. I'd like to introduce an expert who it's not the first time that she's going to make her presentation, and Tatiana Valerievna, she's doing it so well. And in a few minutes, she is the head of the Center on the Research of Russia and New Independent as of French Institute of International Relations. And this is one of the most famous think tanks, European think tanks. This organization of analytical studies that studies researches international relations in the former USSR countries. So the subject matter has been identified. It's on the screen. So without further ado, over to Tatiana. Thank you. Your good recommendation offers to our expert. So how come there are two names, two countries? Always interesting. Yeah. Okay, thank you everybody. And so let me say a few words about myself. I have several higher educations, Russian, French, higher educations. And 15 years ago I moved to France and I married a French. That's why I have double name. Last name. So I have two passports, two nationalities. I always keep saying that. But I live in the environment outside my passports. I am a researcher of French Institute of International Relations. I'm an independent researcher. So the main point, the main strength of this institution, it's independence of political parties, ideological movements, even independence of the state financing, which is 20% of the budget, and 2/3 is financing from different companies, French companies. So the entire stock exchange list. So they are our sponsors. And I'd like to thank the school that for a chance to speak on the subject of soft power of Russia. Because I've been writing on this subject for a long period of time, but I never had a chance to speak. But whenever I start talking soft power, so they start, so what is it about? What is it about Matryoshka dolls? Is it about the Russian Orthodox Church? And they start to scowl. And but this is a more comprehensive issue. That's why I want just to go along. So first, instruments of financing, specifics of soft power of Russia, and the results and instruments in financing, and the impact of Russian soft power. So this soft power term was invented by Joseph Nye, an American, who determined soft power as a capability of one political author change the behavior of other countries by way of its attractiveness, and not by way of economic remuneration, but by way of attractiveness of your country, its culture, values. This is soft power and the quality of international and domestic policy. This is the soft power. So then it certainly is different from hard power, from military ways of application of power. So soft power is something when you don't need, you didn't need a whip, you don't need a carrot, but because of your attractiveness, your partners will follow you, and they will change their position for your position, or the position that you would want them to take. So there are many instruments. So many authors spoke about the subject matter. So they spoke other instruments, business, prestige of companies, leadership at the regional level, so the ability just to build trustworthy relations, images, technical successes of the country, scientific. So there is a long list, and the only one exception is direct military intervention. So it's anything. So with the exception of military power is soft power. And it's all interrelated with public policy and promotion in the area of so attractive image of your country. So soft power, a country can be a source of soft power. So American dream, the country of immigrants, talents, universities, Hollywood, so soft power. America is one of the countries that's a good example of soft power. So that was a response for criticism of the United States and the thesis about the decline of the power of the United States of America. And Joseph Nye said that the essence of power of the state changes, not only the military, not only economic power. So the other instruments of attractiveness start to come into play. And in this respect, the United States is ahead of all countries. And so then the soft power organizations, for example, the European Union can have a lot of soft power. So in the Ukrainian crisis, you can see that the trigger that triggered off those Maidan events was the abandonment of idea of signing the association agreement with the EU. Because President Yanukovych refused to sign that agreement, and that immediately resulted in this uprising. Then organizations. So, for example, Golitsyno process in the area of higher education that was launched by the governments of different countries, European countries not only, and which means it's harmonization of education. So Bologna process, so this process is an example of soft power. It goes without saying. So Russia in 2003 joined this process, this Bologna process. No one invited Russia, no one forced, but Russia understood that that not to join this process would be thrown outside the European environment of higher education in the European Union. As one of the ministers said, if we don't join, then our graduates will start being highly evaluated the same way as so they don't value and like our aircraft anymore in a few years if we don't join. Why soft power is so needed? Good for image, so self-respect. If you feel good about yourself, you can prove yourself. But not only for that, the soft power, behind the soft power stand financial, economic, and political and geopolitical interests. So soft power, so there is power. It's soft, but there is power. So there was a good example. So when Poland was joining the European Union, and in France, they didn't like, they criticized because the cheap labor would flood European markets and will oust small businesses and kill. For some reason, all the debates concentrated on the Polish plumber. And so this fear of Polish plumber, so because they were afraid to lose work because they will just take away their jobs. And so it was kind of crystallized in this image. So I like the answer of the Polish tourism office. So they put these posters all over Paris of the Polish plumber, and it said, I'm staying in Poland. You come to us. I'm staying in Poland, you come to us. So it's an image move, and but I think it was a breakdown point. So the attitude to Poland. So the moment, so Poland is going just to join us, and so then immediately, have you seen this advertising? So what's a wonderful advertising? And that was certainly the breakdown point in the Polish image in France, and that accelerated the accession in Russia. It's the other way around. So the soft power, a bad image, and it's not they don't like you because behind so lost profit, broken deals. So Mr. Mordashov so acknowledged that if he didn't get the deal with Arcelor in France, it's because the bad image of Russia was in their way, and they went for the Lakshmi. And they sold this company to an Indian company. So the similar things, 2009, Opel that couldn't buy Sberbank of Russia, Magna, etc. And Sberbank couldn't buy Opel. So if you take Gazprom image, so it's very negative image. And so just shutting down gas in 2009, so play this negative role. You see how it impacts the economy. So these are the companies, the countries that import natural gas from Russia. So Russia in 2002, 45% of all the gas deliveries to European Union. 2010, it's only 31%. And they're not sanctions. It's not the targeted policy. It's the rational selection of some factors. So they will not make a choice in favor of Russia. So Russia certainly is the leading supplier, but its share is reducing, and so the Qatar share is going up. It's not only image, so that liberalization of the market is important, and the gas market in the European Union, etc. But still, so this lost 14%. So some of this percent is the image of unreliable supplier who, any moment for political reasons, can stop the gas. It can shut down the valves, and then higher education. Another good. So I spoke about the problems of higher education. It's higher education. This is the good example of soft power. The forecast of UNESCO 2000-2015, the number of students will increase from 100 to 200 million people. So abroad study. Almost 4.5 million study abroad. And so that's a lot of people who potentially are vectors, carriers of soft power, And so now we have a market of higher education. Your universities are beginning the race, a competitive race with other universities in your territory, in other countries, so to provide higher education. This market, so there are trends to cooperate, many bilateral agreements, etc., and the masters, diplomas, all jointly. But then there's a competitive dynamics is there as well. Distribution of students by countries. In the United States, 16%. But this share was 25%. So actually, those other countries managed to shrink the share of the United States. So they're very active, attracting foreign students to their countries. Why they do that? Why should they invite foreign students to Russia? What do they bring with themselves? So first, short-term prospects. So that's a good financial, the good money. So $4.5 trillion in 2013. And that 25% of this market is owned by the United States. And many countries like Australia, New Zealand, Canada, so the proceeds from foreign students, and it's not only fees, but it's living costs as well. Fees and living costs. And that's a lot, it's a high, considerable financial flows. So that to feed the budgets of those countries. Then to retain national talents and to attract foreign talents, it may have a good synergetic economic technological effect. If you remember, so the founder of Google, Sergey Brin, he is a Russian guy. He was born in Russia. And the same we can just tell about many Nobel laureates who work not in their country or their origin, but where they eventually live. And for many years, under the OECD headquarters, so they're discussing the economy of knowledge, so where the human capital is in the center of it. So some get human quality, human capital, quality of research, and quality of the atmosphere to retain and attract talents. And so knowledge is a structurizing element so along the lines of financial markets, economics, and security, safety, and military power. So that's a very important component. And then the higher education is an instrument of soft power as well, because the quality of higher education adds to the prestige, attractiveness of the country. So to educate the world elites is a very important channel of influence that it gives. This is capital of sympathy, so which may bring about political or economic dividends. So when we are inviting so the Prime Minister of Israel, so he said, so the best reminiscences are the years spent in France in the university campus. So you immediately understand that being the Prime Minister, this person would never become aggressive towards France, and who quite probably will open up new contacts, new channels, economic trades and deals. And so this is a delayed soft power application. And so now there's this role of higher education. So there's these instruments, so the developing countries the BRICS countries are interested in that as well, Russia and China too. So Mr. Putin is not accidentally that one at 5 Russian universities by 2020 would become in top 100 universities, world university, global universities. And so, but we have such a goal, and so the ratings are very important instruments, developing the new methods, technologies, and so the domineering model is the Anglo-Saxon model. Another example, soft power, without imposing any rigid orders. So this Anglo-Saxon model evolves, spreads by itself, because the American universities are the leading universities in all ratings, global ratings. Then the instruments of Russian soft power. So let's come to that point. In the 90s, we could not talk even about soft power. In the 90s, Russia was busy with other priorities, economic transfer, many problems, challenges. And at that time, I saw the war in Chechnya that did not contribute to soft power too. And the external international policy that was referred to as romantic, liberal, pro-West politics. So no idea to identify identity, to oppose itself to the West, etc. So there was no question about that. So, but then the changes during the first mandate of the first term of Mr. Putin, 2003, 2004. So they are just trying to return the power and the prestige of the superpower that was lost in the 90s. And so this policy, so the reform of the military, so the first, because Serdyukov contributed, that was a priority so the revival of the army and the military. So the second buttress is the renationalization of the energy sector. So the Russian economic model is the element that could guarantee so the social foundation of stability. And the third is the prestige and image, and this is where the soft power inscribes. Because so the Russian elites understood the importance of soft power during the Orange Revolutions. In 2004, when we understood that we could lose Ukraine, and then 2007, 2008, so the first big package of instruments of soft power was set up. So along three lines. The first line is the stepping up the traditional methods of influence. So usually the former republics. So what we talk about here is the support of the Russian language through different organizations. The Russian World, I think you know this organization, was set up 2007, headed by Mr. Nikonov. And so then the founding principle is so we need to retain, to keep, and to use wider the Russian language and culture in the world. So I read an article that we just set up Presidential Council for the Russian language, the media representatives to strengthen, to enhance geography of the presence and application of the Russian language. And so then the council has 40 people, director of Russian and some institutions. Dmitry Kiselov is there as well. So I think that Dmitry Kiselov would be someone who people would not like. But the Twitter this morning, so that the Armenian deputy suggested that Dmitry Kiselov should be made persona non grata, because yesterday he said that we need to promote Russian language in Armenia. And so that certainly was the breach of national sovereignty. It was the breach of national sovereignty. It was regarded as such. Was the violation of impinging on national sovereignty. So then another concept which is being promoted, the concept of the Russian world. The Russian world that goes outside the Russian boundaries and encompasses all those who we call compatriots. Compatriot is a kind of a complicated term. So compatriots are those who speak Russian, those who live abroad, those who are the descendants of the immigrants, and so the concept is kind of rather far-fetched, and but it's not so certain, so then the federal law interprets it in a very doubtful way, confused way. So anyway, so then the Russian Orthodox Church participates in this process. Professor Zubov spoke about that, and then the Russians would like to live in the country with different boundaries. So this concept participates in this concept. So the Russian world that goes outside its physical boundaries, and the concept actually it's not so innocuous. And it's not only cultural or language concept, because Russia is actively participating. So the policy of issuing passports in different republics. So whether Russian Transnistria issuing Russian passports, the South Ossetia, Abkhazia, the same was happening in Crimea, as we know. So we have the law on defense that allows the president to use the army to protect the interests of our compatriots in the territory of foreign countries. That's exactly the request that Putin was asking from the Council of Federation, and he did not act on this. On it, but so this concept with such implications that provide military methods of intervention cannot fail to raise concerns even in our nearest members like Kazakhstan and Belarus, and so because this was all brightly spoken and was telling so after the crisis of Crimea, and so that's why they refused any supranational functions within the framework of the European Russian Union. So then the university and the other connections will be established, and regional migration projects on the auspices of Russia, and then supporting international development, contributing to it. So the organization that is responsible for this mission is the cooperation. Kosachev heads it, and in April. So they adopted the new concept of Russian participation of help in the international development, where they identify some priorities. Russia moves over from passive participation in foreign programs to active building of their own programs. So the budget has been allocated, the money has been provided, and so now the priority should be made on the countries allies of Russia and the countries that could guarantee and help create good environment for Russian businesses. So then in the background, so this is helping the international relationship, but in practice it's promoting Russian business relationships because so both so what the Russians want to do, this is a logo with matryoshka on every bag, so with humanitarian aid. So I think that it should be channeled differently and not the channels of international organizations where this money just puts in one big pot and support is provided under the auspices of different organizations. Second big component of instruments, block of instruments, that's naturally everything that has to do with the information and media channels and instruments. Starting from 2004, we have set up a whole toolkit that operates, works with international countries, with foreign countries. They're working for the West and for international Russia Today. It's one TV channel that was set up 2005. It broadcasts in Arabic, Spanish, and
And we should say that the channel wins more and more audience because it offers some alternative points of view on some events. In Western, there are some also inclination in ideological field, so those channels that offer different points of view win support. And according to the statistics, it's 30% more, has 30% more share than the Deutsche Welle or US CTV. Starting from the beginning of 2014, Russia Today agency combined both Russia Today and the Voice of Russia and RIA Novosti news agency. So it's a powerful media instrument that Russia is using actively in the West. An entire toolset of other instruments was also established. The Valdai Forum, for instance, that gives Western experts access to top officials of Russia and make it possible for them to participate. A lot of expert magazines were initiated targeting specific audience, for instance, Russian global affairs. Applications in foreign languages were also launched in alliance with major Western weeklies. Russia Today is published once a month as an application to Figaro newspaper. Two antennas were set up. One is headed by Natalia Narachnytsky in Paris, and the other is in New York, headed by Antonik Migronyan, who are the very strong mouthpieces of the Kremlin policy, and which has quite a share in the media environment. Also today, on the part of the Russian authorities, they have some supervision over the internet because we have paid commentators, pro-Russia blog posts, and some other things that tell us that the internet environment is also accessible to Russian leaders. So that influence always suggests some resistance or counter influence, and if we promote our positions, then we would not miss a chance to condemn or criticize Western positions. Some very capable experts came to that business, which generates stories that arouse sympathy around the world. And as the French say, that Napoleon said that he was afraid of 3 newspapers more than 100,000 troops. And those newspapers are read today by radio, television, and the internet. In France alone, the number of various instruments of soft power, soft influence, include the French-Russian Chamber of Trade and Commerce. About 3 weeks ago, that chamber met with the Prime Minister, Laurent Fabius, with a great message calling for not imposing sanctions on Russia because it would reciprocate and hit French business. It's also the dealing with the targeted audiences. On the picture below, you can see the ambassador of Russia who speaks at the Youth Forum in Strasbourg, France. It includes also such media sources as Russian Thought, Russia Courier, Russian Orthodox Church newspaper, and the construction of the Orthodox and Cultural Center on one of the embankments in Paris, close to the Eiffel Tower. It's also one of the elements of the Russian soft power. The year of French-Russian culture took place 2 years ago. And again, pro-Russian televisions, which is Russian TV, and this all put together. Those instruments have, sorry, I missed one thing, third block, to create image abroad. That's major prestigious projects. Among them, certainly the games in Sochi. It's a World Cup in Russia in 2018, and other projects aiming at enhancing and improving the image of Russia, so that the country could be viewed and perceived as an open and developed country. Starting from 2008, Russia has been paying for the services of a number of PR agencies, such as Ketchup, that cooperates with the Russian government, since Russia was had presidency in the G8. And Ketchup continues that effort in the US territory and is paid quite well. Soft power was planned to be developed through various areas. Tourism was one of them. The idea was to attract tourists because, according to Russian tourist agency, we had some 30 visitors in Russia in 2013, but only 2.5 million of them said that tourism was their main objective. Otherwise, Asians come to Russia as a country of transit, so that to get to the European countries. And about a month ago, the federal government of Russia adopted the strategy of the development of tourism until 2020. Plans are made to increase tourist throughput by 30%, but the main idea is to build more rooms and build more hotels. Although the average occupancy of Russian hotels, existing hotels now, is just 60–65%, not more. So the size of tourists today in Russia is 5 times less than in comparable countries. Another image campaign the Russian government tried to launch was the improvement of climate for foreign investors. And you might have heard about that idea to be ranked well, to be on the top 20 in doing business ranking. And Goldman Sachs is paid a lot of money so that they would contribute to enhance Russia's image as the country attractive for investments. And the Goldman Sachs is the very bank which in 2001 launched the BRICS acronym, which Russia liked and included it into its political components. So that acronym is positioned quite high because it helps to perceive the image of Russia as the leader among non-Western countries. Further on, the soft power, in fact, is backed by very large budgets. I'm not able to give you any specific number or figure because some information is classified and it's hard, to get the whole picture. But we can think of some elements. First of all, they are quite sizable amounts development cooperation, 610 million. RIA Novosti news agency, 200 million and something. Catering agency, 2 million each month. Goldman Sachs will get $500,000 for the period of 3 years each year. Second remark about budgets, those budgets are swelling. Russia TV budget in 2005, it was 30 million. In 2013, it was 216 million. But still, those budgets are much less than those of their counterparts abroad. If you draw a parallel between Russia Today and Deutsche Welle, it's about had a budget of 275 million euros in 2010, and the BBC had $3 billion budget. So in higher education, U.S. about 3% of its GDP is allocated for for education. In Russia, we allocate only 1.6% of the total GDP. If you compare costs per rich student a year, Russia spends about $8,000 a year per student. In the United States, it's $30,000, and even in some emerging markets, say in China, that figure is at par with the U.S. So what's the outcome of the Russian soft power? Something has been achieved in the doing business ranking. From 124th position in Russia moved to position 92 in 2013. In Transport International, it was switched from 157th place to 124th position. But there are very few indicators that can be measured in quantitative terms through rankings. Soft power has more erosed and long-term effects. And Russia is not suited, Russian government is not suited with that all the time. Last year there was a point when Russia, by the end of the year, in terms of its influence and image, was ranked very high following the Snowden case. And big part of their Western society accepted and approved of the Russia's position. And then there was the Syrian settlement, and Russia was also praised high when a decision was taken to eliminate Syrian chemical weapons. So President Putin was ranked number one in terms of influence and power. It was done by the Forbes magazine, but then came the Crimea. But before I switch to the Crimea affair, I would like to identify some reasons why Russian soft power is controversial and doesn't work well. It has some special features, and in soft power there are two components. First, there is an attractive model that exists in reality, and the other component is the active policy to promote that model. So in the Russian case, there is a contradiction when we have a lot of instruments for pursuing active policy, but model becomes not attractive. And to prove that, you can visit various indices to see if Russia's position was approved because of soft power or not. It has, in some instances, it was improved, but not significantly. In others, Russia fell even lower. Secondly, Russia tries to safeguard its position not only through soft power, because the authorities don't trust soft power much, but soft power is always backed by either military force or some other methods of influence. Which you will not always admit, but still. I like this picture because it demonstrates Russian soft power actions. It's the advertisement of Russian Aeroflot airline. It was posted in Belgium. That picture was small, and that picture calls upon the Belgians to discover Russia and come to Moscow. But the size was 3 by 4 meters, and it so happened that The vehicle that rides upon the road is not a car or a vehicle, but an armored personnel carrier. So it triggered a number of responses in the media, in the press, trying to figure out what Aeroflot meant by that picture. But for me, that kind of soft power is an equivalent of that picture. It's tourism, it's so on and so forth, and somewhere in the background there is always an element of the military force, the instrument of enforcement. There is another interesting example, very recent example, and it concerns Russian military budget. Russia is the country which has been increasing the military budget, unlike other countries, but it depends how you present it. And last week, when the president came to celebrate the operation in Normandy last week, he was interviewed by the French radio and television. And it was really the top of the news. And when I was asked if Russia felt isolated in the world, it was really funny to talk about isolation, because all the channels had a coverage of those interviews for 3 days in a row. And President Putin said a very interesting phrase about the military budget. For your reference, the military budget of the U.S. Is in excess of all the military budgets of other countries put together. In our case, it has not increased. Its share is not increased towards the GDP, just a fraction of percentage points. And I really looked at that table 3 days before this meeting, and it's true, the military budget increased several fractions of the percentage points. But in absolute figures, the picture is absolutely different. And Alexei Kudrin, when he left the government, he had to leave because he criticized the swelling military budget. And this is the evolutions of military budgets of other countries, except the United States. All other military budgets are decreasing. But following the Crimean event affair, this is something that has been debated very heatedly, and the French government recently announced further cuts on the military budget, and some French generals declared a strike in protests of those further cuts. So those are the divergent trends, and perhaps it explains the reason for the crisis in the Crimea. You can achieve something through military force. If you recall the war in Georgia, military victory helps us to prove your supremacy and achieve some political concessions. So following the war in Georgia, all the speculations about Georgia's accession to NATO stopped. But there are some other ends that you cannot reach through military forces. If you want to attract foreign investors, then those methods would not do. There is another aspect where Russian soft power either cannot work or just brings opposite effects. And the soft power cannot operate in only one area. It's heaps of problems. And returning to my favorite, higher education. In all the universities and national research or federal universities, in their curriculum, or in their programs and their plans, they want to attract more and more foreign international students and international professors. And still, when you look at the internal problems of higher education, and if you study the academic culture, copying, informal ties, employment of graduates, you can understand that under the circumstances, no international professors can really work, and it applies also to international students. But apart from those internal problems, there are even broader problems that go beyond that framework, and it's the image of Russia, it's the migration policy, xenophobia, and all other issues to be addressed. So for each university, if there is an objective to achieve some level, to get some proportion of foreign professors and students, it cannot be done unless other general political issues are addressed. And similar things may apply to tourism. So the reason why there are few tourists, not because we are short of hotels. Another inefficiency point, it has to do with the lack of activities and genuine ideas. We keep on copying some models, some foreign models of foreign universities, instead of inventing our own ways. And when we are trying to catch up with some models, Western universities have already given those older ideas up, and they launched, say, online courses, and in the first 3 months, 5 million people applied. So it shows that Russia is not capable of generating new ideas. We always do something in order to catch up or overtake somebody. And the other problem with Russian soft power is that the main actor here is not the civil society but the state. And it's the state that launches all the projects, provides funds, while civil society and associations look like being in wait for, they're just waiting when they are allowed to work in one or another area. And the state, when it takes action, it uses some patterns and templates. I tried to study soft power in Ukraine, and I spoke of Russian soft power, and I heard the following. They told me that first Russia was dealing only with the formal levels of governance in Ukraine, and with oligarchs through more subtle methods, but attempts to work with civil society are very weak. There are some attempts to finance projects, but it's done through the Academy of Sciences. There's a joint project, and that's about it. When I first came, I met with to Ukraine. I met with 15 think tanks in international affairs. I just made my choice on the basis of their ranking and quotations, so I knew very little about them before. I was very much surprised that at every meeting I asked, who financed your projects? None of the 15 think tanks were financed from the Ukrainian budget, and none of the 15 had any grants or some subsidies from the Russian budget. They all worked on the bilateral level, and mostly they received funds from Denmark and Norway, and they finance those projects which perhaps they cannot benefit directly. It's projects to take care of gypsies or mothers' mortality, and still they finance those projects. So you don't have to be surprised when Ukrainians voice their support in favor of moving to Europe. And there was one expert who was close to the Party of the Regions, and he used to be the aide to the foreign minister of Ukraine. But even for that expert and his think tank, finances came from abroad. So again, it's a weakness of the Russian soft power in Ukraine, and perhaps even in some other countries, and perhaps somebody from those present here, from Armenia, for instance, will tell us if there are any projects that Russia finances on the level of civil society. Let's take the Crimean affair. Crimea fitted into the image losses of the Russian Federation abroad very well. It's starting from Khodorkovsky, Magnitsky list, Pussy Riots, and the Crimea. Those are the very negative aspects for the Russian image. Russia is the permanent member of the Security Council, and all out of a sudden it acquired the territory of the country which sovereignty it guaranteed in a number of international treaties. It was taken as a total contradiction to the previous Russia's policy when Russia always stood always in favor of the integrity of sovereignty and not in favor of the right of nations for self-determination. So it was a U-turn in Russian foreign policy. And in the Security Council, Russia was isolated when the resolution on the territorial integrity of Ukraine was put to vote. And 10 countries in the security vote voted against that, and that's the list. And so all the countries on the Security Council voted against it. Which country recognized Abkhazia and South Ossetia following the war? Very few countries. And those are the points when the Russian soft power is to be most proactive, so that your partners would follow you because of your attractiveness. And the Security Council voting on the resolution showed that it was not the case. So the Crimean crisis undermined the European orientation of Russia significantly. The European orientation was proclaimed by Mr. Putin himself in 2001, and then all out of a sudden a U-turn is made and Russia is moving towards China. And there is a very high interdependency between Russia and the EU. European Union's share of foreign trade is 50% with Russia. Investments in Russia of the EU, billions of dollars. Banks and enterprises were granted cheap loans in the European countries, in the European banks, to the amount of about $500 billion. And now Russia is moving east, and some fundamental things are being destroyed, to my regret. Russia can suffer even financial and economic losses because of the sanctions imposed. Well, sanctions themselves just the fly's bite and unpleasant but not mortal. But those sanctions have some indirect impact. Since for investors it's a single, because investors are unaware of probable next round of sanctions. And they do not invest in Russia, being afraid of further sanctions, and it only reinforces the trend of stagnation or even a recession, obvious since 2013. That's the indicator of perception of Russia abroad. In the USA, November 2013, 18% of the Americans believe that Russia is adversary. In March 26, in November, just 26% believe that Russia is a serious problem. In March, 46%. In France, even worse, in March 2014, 78% of the French population think negatively about Russia. In a nutshell, all those tool sets, all those funds that were spent, they were just wasted, and it would take a long time to change the situation. But at the same time, Russian soft power can be seen in a different shape. For instance, the referendum in the Crimea, perhaps it's not it was not 96%. The majority of the citizens of the Crimea put their votes in favor of the accession to Russia. When you compare the wages and pensions in Russia and other CIS countries, that's quite telling. And Russia is the second after the United States country in terms of the size of migrants that come to Russia. And that channel of soft power is quite bright. According to the World Bank, 48%, nearly half of the Tajik GDP and 36% of the Kyrgyz GDP are money transfers from Russia. But outside post-Soviet space, Russia enjoys also some favorite aspects or instances of soft power impact. I would emphasize three aspects. It's traditional culture, literature, poetry, music. So no matter what political situation is even on the peak of the Crimean crisis in the world, there are admirers of the Russian culture, and that's the capital that Russia will preserve under any circumstances. Secondly, for a long time, Russian soft power suffered from the content of its framework, what ideas, what thoughts had to be presented. Now we have that content, and that's traditional conservative values that Russia defend and protect, in opposing the morally degrading Europe, where people depart from traditional values. I'm quoting various official speeches by Russian officials. So the protection and defense of the traditional values is well received in some parts of the Western populations. As for the Marine Le Pen, for instance, that the leader of the French rightist party is supportive of the Putin's action in the Crimea, and she paid a visit to Russia twice, and she was received with dignity, and it's true that recent elections to the European Parliament in last March showed that Marine Le Pen polled some 25%.
As we're seeing some rapprochement alongside the conservative lines with some of these right-wing parties and groups, and there are quite a few supporters of the Russian policies in France on both sides of the spectrum. One on the left, deriving from the socialist or Soviet times in the Soviet Union. So this was indeed the traditional leftist sympathies, and also we're seeing this general liking and people growing fond of Russia's policies on the right side of the spectrum, and I can quote several right-wing politicians to this effect. So there are quite a few champions of the Russian policies in France, and one may say that this is a result of this soft power, which may not be working the way we might have wanted it, but it still does work. The fact that part of the Russian, of the French population are generally in support of Mr. Putin is his personality. There's a lot and growing antipathy of the so-called weak democratic leaders. And here is a leader who perceives himself to be a part of history, and an heir to the great tradition, which evokes quite a bit of liking with some social groups or persons in France. Against the weak President Obama and the weak President and even weaker President Hollande, a strong President like Mr. Putin is in an advantageous position. So indeed, the Russian soft power may not be developing and propagating in the way one would have wanted, but this can be seen in the general venue. But the Russian soft power, I think, has now reached its peak. It's the acme of the Russian soft power that we're witnessing today, and we do not believe that it may evolve further on the same background and against the same and on the same foundations. For this to happen, for this to come on to a new level, and to increase the influence, there is no other thing but to change. And I think that Russia may be facing strategic isolation, which is what was indeed seen in the Security Council during the Ukraine vote. Colleagues, we have half an hour for the discussion. Our colleague from Moscow Institute of International Relations, Nikita Molchakov from Moscow Diplomatic Academy. I have a comment to make. I think that the political labels are indeed important in terms of the soft power, but I think that one of the most terrible labels is that of a failure state. And I don't see that Russia is consciously using the terms, whereas the United States have always been very good at terminology. Remember the empire of evil or the failed state. Well, indeed, this was indeed ignored, the political labels. After the Crimean crisis, I think that these labels were quite widespread. Think about the Bandera and the fascists and the junta in Kiev. So the propaganda machine does work. Sometimes it leads to counter-effective promotion. For instance, at the Institute, there was a very difficult event which was attended by the Russians and the Ukrainians. The Russians were from the Russia Today, the level of Mr. Kiselyov, and I could not pick up the Russian participants because this was a partnership-based story, but I tried to have other persons from the Ukrainian side. The dialogue was very, very difficult indeed. The people at the seminar were not anti-Russian. No, they were former ambassadors, persons who lived in Russia and worked in Russia, who had a generally quite positive Russian image. They came with either neutral or even a positive attitude. They went out of the seminar totally shocked. Did you know that this would be the case? So these political labeling about the fascists, about the Bandera supporters, the inability to listen to the opponents, when the Ukrainians was said that even the pro-Russians would not get more 2%. But the правый sector or the right sector cannot be called fascists. But the Russians weren't listening. So I don't think that this is the labels work in both ways. But it is very difficult to stop at some midpoint to be able to lead a constructive discussion. The seminar I was trying to organize was not in a position to proceed, and there was no dialogue. The dialogue was certainly not in any way constructive. So I do not readily believe that political labeling is in any way efficient in terms of your strategy, and it can well become counterproductive. Thank you very much. Thank you for this very interesting, brilliant indeed presentation. I'm Evgenia Saiko from Tomsk. I live in Berlin. You have said that the instruments that Russia is using are quite powerful, like Russia Today, news agency. In Germany, they do not seem to work. I am somewhat surprised that this channel is being watched in the US, but in Germany, even though at the Brandenburg gates there is the office of the Voice of Russia, and I do not quite see the reason. Süddeutsche Zeitung stopped publishing the Russian supplement, and the Russian-German Palace of Friendship. This building is a classical Soviet palace of culture of the 1980s. So, while you have been dealing with this topic, do you believe that Россотрудничество, the Russian Cooperation Agency, do they in any way try to analyze how efficient are their measures? Well, what I could say, first of all, that the measurement of the efficiency of an awareness or informational campaign is virtually not taking place. And most of the actual measurements are absent. Let us take the program for repatriation. It has taken place for years, but it did not lead to any tangible results. With respect to Germany, there's an interesting moment to be noted. Germany is, of course, number one economic partner and the most important and powerful pro-Russian lobby in Europe is the German business community, including Mr. Schröder, hence one of the pejorative terms, Schröderization of the economy. In Germany, there were some private conversations that there was quite a comfortable audience, and there should be no sanctions. Crimea is a Russian land. We understand that. So the major problem in Germany is this economic channel. In France, the economic stance is much weaker. So here we are seeing some compensation at the expense of some other channels of propaganda or communication or information. Iraklia Kinji from Georgia. Thank you very much. I have two short questions. Could you explain the link between product placement and soft power? When we watch some, we see that Gazprom is one of the official sponsors of the World Cup. And a comment I have to make about, I studied in France and I lived there for several years, and I saw that the soft power, the message that comes from Russia, the message which is propagated to try and explain why we're doing this or that, doesn't seem to work. And the American message does get conveyed. It appears that when the Americans are trying to explain why they're going to Afghanistan and Iraq, it is better understood by the public than when Russia tries to explain why it goes into Crimea. Well, I'm not sure I could comment on the product placement because we should take a look at some studies. But one thing I could say is that soft power is not just a matter of the state machine, but also some specific companies and agencies and business. There are different ratings. Sometimes there's a definite awareness campaign. Gazprom is very active in promoting its image. There is the G Plus company, which is financed by Gazprom and which is exactly has been created to promote Gazprom's image. Russia has long been trying to explain what it needs from Ukraine. Gazprom is financing very different exhibitions. Any large exhibition, for instance, in 2010 during the Russian-France Friendship Year, Gazprom was very high profile in sponsoring and being named among the donors of very different artistic events and such like events. With respect to your comment about the success of the American message, I think that there are two tendencies which can be and need to be taken into account in today's Europe. Number one being the Eurosceptics, and Russia is indeed always trying to support the Eurosceptics, and Russia has always found it easier to work on a bilateral scale and plane rather than working with Brussels. I can't and would not want to go as far as to say that Russia wants to lead the European Union to its doom. But I think that the reason why Russia has always been more supportive of the Eurosceptics is exactly because it finds it more bilateral talks. It is like the criticism. France, you've given up your sovereignty to Brussels. You've forgotten the commandments of de Gaulle. And the French may be very susceptible to this. And the second important tendency is the anti-Atlanticism. The American soft power is gravely damaged, has been gravely impaired by the military actions, the military campaigns, and there's been some transatlantic treaties. And many believe that there is still danger coming economically from the Atlanticism. So in this sense, the Russian soft power is playing very finely. Tatiana Valeryevna. Mr. Kolomoisky, Anna Zakarian from Volgograd. Mr. Kolomoisky proposed to Mr. Poroshenko a 1,900-kilometer metal wall from reinforced steel, that a 50 million euro investment to guard Ukraine from Putin. Do you think that Ukraine is indeed trying to build a wall against Russia, or is this just an attempt to compromise Russia? One thing is, talks don't mean much. Words don't mean much, and what I have seen is a radical degradation of Russia's image in the so-called brotherly nations. I'm talking about Ukraine, and I would not be particularly surprised to see such a wall coming up, but I don't think that practically this will be implemented, because in any event, Russia and Ukraine and Russia will have to negotiate and will have to come to an agreement. Some ways out will have to be sought. So I think let us, for the moment, think that this is an anecdote. Natalia Melichova from Yaroslavl. I would like to give two examples of soft power. When the Crimean story erupted, I was in the United States. I was in Minnesota, and the one thing came up with is that the American mass media on the national level and the state level were all channeling one strictly anti-Russian position, and people were so well used to it that many people, once they saw see a person coming from abroad, like me, they prefer to ask the opinion from the actual witnesses, and the official mass media don't seem to be so authoritative. As far as I know, it is not just in Russia where we see the level of confidence in the mass media is going down. So one of my first conclusions is that people in many countries, not just in Russia, stopped or lost their faith in the official mass media. So soft power is in many ways an ability to try and convey your message across. So you have to import as many native speakers as you can. I see. We were a big international company in Istanbul in May. There were Europeans, Americans, Russians, and the situation with Crimea was discussed very vividly. And we were in a small tram car who was flirting with some English language ladies, and he was from Crimea. He was telling them what he saw and what he felt. And our company, which had several persons, then the foreigners started to stand for this pro-Russian position, because together with this flirting, this young man was promoting a pro-Russian stance. This example of a person from the people changed the opinions of the people more than any mass media could. People want to trust each other rather than to trust newspapers. And if citizens of one country trust and like their country, I think this is the most important and the most transparent way of including and improving your state power. It is one thing to listen to Mr. Kisilyov saying that the Americans let the killer dolphins into the Black Sea, and another thing is that with some mechanisms like you discussed are at work. Well, a couple of serious notes. Last week I had a meeting with a young lady who wants to create an anti-Seliger front, and she would be interested in seeing how to take young people from other countries in France, the study tour. This is like a study tour system, and indeed this soft power channel does exist. On the other hand, there's an attempt to show that such organized formats can be useful as study tours. This is the number one thing I would like to mention. Secondly, you have said that the trust towards official mass media or large mass media is decreasing in the West. Well, it is true, and this is one of the reasons why Russia today is growing in popularity. The Western mass media are not lying outrightly, but there's a certain angle of how the material is conveyed, which formulates a certain opinion. At the peak of the Ukrainian crisis, my neighbors would stop me in the street and say, "What is happening at your at your in your country, and there was indeed a need to talk. This was not just among the young people. There's some factories or companies which are being financed, and there was no reason. And with the conference calls, we were getting more and more conference calls, the need to get information from first hand, the need to try and to talk to those who can analyze the information. The third element I would like to mention in this sense is that today's every person is a newspaper. Every person has a smartphone. Everybody is uploading on the web whatever he or she wants, and it is not a fact that the eyewitness may interpret the events properly. And secondly, it is not to be excluded that the person may have been paid to produce a certain message on the web. When there is not much information, it is bad, and when there is an abundance or even a redundancy of information, it is as bad. Because when you see a picture with an explosion or an explosion taking place, then the caption under this little footage would depend on the particular views and the particular standing of that person who has uploaded this, and it would not be sufficient to watch the footage to make the correct conclusion. The only thing that we're trying to do as analysts is to crisscross information from different sources, is to track the deep-seated tendencies as to who benefits, and finally it is the visit to the actual site of events, which is why I went to Ukraine, which does not mean that I always trust what the Ukrainians say. Armen Zakharyan. Well, thank you very much. Armen Zakharyan, director of Yerevan School of Political Studies. A couple of words about the events in Yerevan for you to have a good impression, a proper impression. About 4 years ago, Deputy Minister of the Foreign Minister spoke here, and I told him, Mr. Grushko, I told him that we are losing Russian language in Armenia. There are less and less people speaking Russian, and there are more and more people learning English. And he told me, why are you telling me this? And I say that Russian language it was the only foreign language which was at the same time a language of exchange. Russian language is a treasure in the post-Soviet space. I'm in no way against English. My sons are speaking English better than they speak Russian. But I would certainly like the Russian language to be present. But Mr. Kiselyov, that Andrei mentioned, went to the State Duma hearing. Make the Russian language a state language in Armenia, or else you will have problems with your security. Why? He's asked. Because I said I took a cab in Yerevan, and the cab driver didn't speak Russian. Aram just showed me the Minister of Education of Armenia spoke, who is, by the way, the alumnus of the Moscow School of Political Studies. He said that we proposed to the Russian party to have 4 schools in Yerevan, to have a full curriculum of the Russian language, according to the Ministry of Education. For the past 3 years, while this treaty was indeed signed, And I think that when we speak about the soft power, I think that Mr. Kicillof was unfortunately not in any way soft. Well, you're right. This is exactly what I said. But this is the major problem. Very often, the so-called cultural things, the Russian party is expecting some economic concessions or political concessions. France is very active in promoting the French language. There are francophonic countries, the French courses, and there are indeed some economic background under that too. And it would be inconceivable to have France to be asking for some economic or political concessions from a country which is supported in the framework of such language or cultural programs. Indeed, the CIS countries are divided from the standpoint of Russian language into three groups. Group number one is Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, Kazakhstan, and Moldova to a lesser degree. Number two is Armenia, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan, about 30% of speaking Russian speakers. And these are generally people who would like to have a better knowledge of Russian as they see good economic, cultural, and scientific benefits in learning and studying Russian. So this is group number two. And there's group number three, Azerbaijan and Georgia, where less than 30% speak the Russian language, and they do not see any particular reason why they should study Russian, or they should not. They do not seem to need any greater value in the Russian contribution to their countries. Thank you, colleagues. We would like to thank our expert, Tatiana Kastueva-Jean, for this very interesting session. Tatiana has been here before, and each subsequent lecture is more interesting than the preceding one. Thank you. We will resume in 30 minutes.
Замечательно.